The first one is that when you were saved, if you're a Christian, one of the primary purposes for your salvation, one of the fundamental ones, not the only one, but one of the biggest ones, you were saved to be a servant. A servant. That your identity shifted when you became a Christian. Whatever you were before that, mom, dad, business owner, boss, preacher, teacher, whatever it was, when you become a Christian, you become a servant. You're saved to be a servant. And what these Corinthians basically thought is, well, when I got saved, I was saved so that people could think I'm awesome. Basically what they were thinking. When I was saved, I was filled with the power of the Holy Spirit. I was given amazing gifts. And God gave me these amazing gifts of speaking in tongues and doing prophecy and acts of service and all these awesome things so that I could be awesome and know that I'm awesome, and so that I could use these gifts in the church and everyone else would look at me and think, he's really awesome. That's what they thought. And Paul is saying, no, God did not save you, fill you with the power of the Holy Spirit and give you these awesome gifts so that you would think you're awesome. God gave you these special gifts and filled you with the power of the Holy Spirit so that you could use those gifts to serve the church. You're a servant. Even Paul, even Apollos, the main guys, the kingpins, we were not even given the gifts we were given so that you would make much of us or make us significant. We are servants. And that word translated servant, there in chapter 3, verse 1, or chapter 3, verse 5. Who's Paul? What is Paul? What is Apollos? He doesn't even use the word who. He says, what are we? He's de-emphasizing their personalities. What are we? We're servants. It's the word deaconoi, is where we get our English word deacon. Anybody know what a deacon is? Well, whatever you think of a deacon, that's not what this text is saying. Before deacon became to mean a leader in the church, a deacon was merely a table waiter, a guy who waits on the tables. And whatever nobility that has in our culture, working at Outback, you can make a pretty good living being a table waiter. But it wasn't that way in the first century. It wasn't that way in this culture. Paul is saying we're insignificant in as far as our personalities go. We're just trying to be servants. We're not the head of the house. We're not the head of the table. We're not the owner of the house. We're not to be waited on by table waiters. We are the table waiters. We're insignificant in that way because when God calls you into salvation, part of what he calls you to is this life of service. We're servants. And really, this isn't that radical. I know it's radical in our culture. In our culture, your significance is attached to what you do, and the more important what you do is, the more important you become. But Jesus, when he was teaching his disciples, he said, there is a way of worldly leadership, and the way of the Gentiles, they take their power and they use it and domineer over people, but not so with you. With my disciples, if I'm going to call you into the kingdom, if you want to be great in the kingdom, and who doesn't want to be great? But Jesus says, if you want to be great, then serve. The first will be last. You want to be great in the kingdom? Serve your brother or sister. For even the Son of Man, Jesus himself, came not to be served, but to serve. And so Paul's saying, don't think of me as this kingpin. Think of me as a servant. So if you want to just take a real brief application, as it comes to thinking about your leaders in the church, thinking about your pastor, you ought not think of me as the preacher necessarily. You ought to think of me or anyone in this church who serves in leadership as a servant who uses the gift of preaching to serve the church. Think of Wes as the senior leader. One, I'm really not a senior. I'm pretty young. I'm not just a lead pastor, but I'm one who uses the gift of leadership to serve the church. I'm a servant. We are servants. And what do you serve? What's the purpose of it? You serve to be helpful. He says we're servants through whom you believed. And so the purpose of serving other people with the gifts that God has given us is so that we would be helpful to them in building up their faith. So any kind of service that you do, whether it's in the church or in the home or at your workplace or whatever you're doing, first paradigm shift is I'm a servant. Second paradigm shift is the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing is so that I can help people, namely help people grow in their faith so that they would put their faith in the Lord, that they would grow in their faith in the Lord. So it's not necessarily about me or my gifts, but how my gifts help people grow in the Lord, and that God is the one who decides where and how I'm going to serve. We're servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. So I planted, Apollos watered, meaning I planted the church. I was the founding apostle. Apollos watered. He stayed there after me. He kept teaching the church. The point is that God decides who goes where, when, and how. And in your life, God has a place for you to serve. And you say, how does God decide who does what and who serves where? It's really, really complex. Part of it is that God gives gifts, spiritual gifts, and so God gifts you in a certain way to put you in a certain place. But it's not just the gifts, it's also just the way that you're shaped. It's the way that you're designed. Some of your personality, your passions, your heart, the things that excite you, your experience, all of those things factor in to who you are and how God is going to use you where you are, but not just to do things that are cool so that people think you're awesome and you become significant, but so that you can take your unique shape and help people in a unique way, because that's the purpose of us becoming believers, is so that we would serve to help. So what about you? A lot of times we can push back against the way that we're shaped and the things that we think God's called us to do because it's not significant. No one's going to see. And Paul is saying, look, you got it all wrong. We were saved to be servants so that we could help people grow in their faith. So let's think for just a minute, what if you really believe that? Would that not just totally revolutionize your life? Think of it as a mom. A lot of us wear a lot of different hats. So some of us, you're a wife, you're a mother, you're a public school teacher, you're a church hospitality worker, and you're a personal friend that does this certain hobby every Tuesday night. All right, that's a lot of hats, okay? What if, just imagine, if you begin to see every environment that you are in and every hat that you wear as a platform for service so that you could help people grow in their faith, does that not all of a sudden infuse those things with incredible significance because God had shaped you in a certain way and put you in a certain place so that you could serve people in a very unique way? That's what Paul is saying. He's saying you're called to be servants. You've taken these gifts and these platforms and made it all about yourself and how significant you are when it was always supposed to be about other people. So, number one, we are a servant. We need to know our role. And, that's just an example of probably not a woman off the top of my head. That woman sounds a whole lot like Audra. I guess that Audra stuff just comes to my head off the top of my head. But it could be a man, could be, you're a dad, you're a husband, you're a business owner. You have all these different hats that you wear, and it's really easy to do your daily grind as if most of your life is completely insignificant. But what if instead of seeing your life as insignificant or seeing these gifts as all for yourselves or just providing for your needs, you begin to think of yourself, hey, I'm a servant, and these gifts are given me so that I can serve people, help them by building their faith. We were saved to be a servant. That's principle number one.